120 seconds. 110 seconds. 100 seconds. 90 seconds. 80 seconds. 70 seconds. 60 seconds. 50 seconds. 40 seconds. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
'Hi,
my name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
All right, my friends, once again, it is indeed time to get our talk on. It's Morning Talk with me, your host, J.C. McCauley, along with the champions of talk every morning at 8 o'clock, every Sunday. Excuse me, every morning at 8 and every evening at 8. This morning, of course, or evening, depending upon when you're watching, we got the one and only Jonathan Small in the house. Mr. Small, how you doing?
Doing fine, Stan. It's a pleasure to be back here. Happy, I guess, early Independence Day to you.
Early Independence Day back at you.
I feel like it's an Independence Day today, though, honestly. I mean, it wasn't much traffic coming down to the studio. I don't know if people like you say that's taking the day off, having an extended long weekend. I guess that's one way of looking at it and everything. So, boy, the year is halfway over. Basically. So, you had anything you did this past weekend? I mean, it was like a up and down weekend for you, or just a normal weekend?
What did I do this weekend? Went to the Latino Fest.
Okay.
I call it the Luna Fest. Yeah, went to the Latino Fest. What else? Did some door knocking. And a lot of office work.
So you always are busy. That's one thing about you with your operation.
Yeah, I try to stay busy, but I had a lot of catching up to do on office stuff. You know, invoices.
probably like a hobby to you almost. I mean,
It's not a hobby.
It's
It's
not
work.
A hobby. It's work. Okay, so you don't make your work into a hobby.
I mean, I enjoy it, but it's the stuff you have to take care of before it takes care of you.
Yes,
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, because you can forget. So if you don't send out invoices and stuff, it's easy to forget about it, and then you don't build a client, and it's Yeah.
Well, one quick thing, I was speaking to someone yesterday, and he was giving me some advice to you because he's running for campaign as well in another state.
In another state?
Yeah.
What is the great sage's advice?
Well, he was saying that you should take, like, when you're doing your campaign, you should actually take some of your shows out to the community. I told him basically you have your mobile unit bus, but he was saying, like, when you're doing certain shows, take your shows, particularly like maybe your Wednesday show, and just one day take your show if there's going to be an event or somewhere in the community. He thinks that might help you attract more people. I don't know, again, if that's a good idea or just a okay idea, or it really doesn't make a difference. But he was just giving me that as one suggestion to you, with your operation, you might want to consider that.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, actually, it's a really good idea. We can explore that a little later on. It's a considerable amount of work. Not that we mind doing the hard work.
Right.
However, it's a 4-hour. The setup and breakdown time is 4 hours. In addition to getting whatever equipment you're going to get, wherever it's going to be. But
Right.
it can be done. So I don't know. It depends upon the return.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it might be a good idea if maybe I can arrange the two of you to talk, because you may be able to offer him some campaign advice. He could probably offer you some campaign advice. You're not in the same state, so you can't really do too much towards getting people in his state to vote for you. But
Well, no one. Yeah, it's a municipal election, so of course the people in his state can't vote for me. But I mean, you can always have a conversation with someone, because you never know what you can learn from someone else until you have the conversation. But yeah, I'll give that some thought. I'm sure the Wednesday host Cacique will love doing a live remote shoot.
right.
But I mean, we could do it. We could do it. I had to float that one past the campaign manager, aka the wife.
The wife, yeah.
And I can already hear her now. She doesn't want me behind cameras in public.
Oh, she doesn't?
Right. So to do this in public, I'm behind a whole lot more than camera.
Okay.
But we can make it happen, just like we do here.
Well, one thing quickly, the key is, I guess, between now and the primary of September, I don't think it makes sense. Well, you could still do it after September.
Yeah, it's a little around 70 days or so.
Right. So you still have time.
Yeah, I mean, we have time.
Okay.
Hey. Yeah, well, you know what, Jonathan? As I like to say, let's make it happen.
Right.
There
You're
we
a
go.
doer.
We'll do it. We'll get it done.
You like basketball?
Well,
you used to like basketball?
I'm not a big basketball player. I could get into the game. I was short in school. So, and I was always afraid of the basketball, because when I had played the one time in school, I went to get the ball, and you know how the ball hit your fingers, you jam your fingers up. That was it.
Was you a 76ers fan growing up?
Well, you grow up in Philadelphia, you are a 76ers fan, you're a Philadelphia Freedom fan, you are absolutely a Philadelphia Flyers fan, Eagles fan. Philadelphia is very, is like the Huskies here. You can't not be a Philadelphia sports teams fan in Philly, and you have to be, especially as a kid.
I'm leading up to our main topic of
All
our
right.
discussion. It's a great league.
All right, so
That's
we
for
have
you.
a special guest joining us from outside of Philly, but I'm not going to get into all that. We'll let Jonathan do that. He's the official booker of guests, so he's going to introduce our special guest. Of course, we have guests from all over the world on Monday mornings, and this morning is no different.
Okay. Well, good morning to people out there on Morning Talk Live with Jay Stan McCauley Talk Show. This morning we have an exceptional guest in the world of sports, and he brings a lot of insightful information, has a tremendous high IQ, I would say, in sports and probably many other areas of life, but definitely the sports world, and an excellent memory to go along with many other components. The guest this week on Morning Talk Live with Jay Stan McCauley Talk Show is a freelance sportswriter based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. No other than Gordon Jones or Gordy Jones. Good morning, Gordy. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you so much for that introduction. That's very kind of you.
Okay, no problem, Gordy. Gordy, could you kind of let people know a little bit about yourself and background briefly before we get into our main topic of discussion?
Yeah, I've been in sports media since 1980, so it's been a long run. That's a lot of Sixers eras, for starting with Julius and going all the way up through Charles Barkley and Allen Iverson, and all the way up through Joel Embiid and the current. So the thing we wanted to touch on today, of course, is the last time the Sixers won the championship, which was 1982-83. It's kind of hard to believe that they haven't won one since then. They've only been to the finals once since then, and that's in 2001 when Allen was their guy. So it's been a long drought, and I'm sure that's making a lot of people restless, as Phillies want to do. But that's where they stand now. It's been a long stretch without a championship.
Well, Gordy, going into 1980, the 1982-1983 Philadelphia 76ers team on era, it was a lot of high expectations. They had just recently come off a loss to the Los Angeles Lakers in the finals in 1982. They had pretty much the same team intact, but they made one major addition, and that was Moses Malone. Was that really, you think, the final piece of the puzzle of putting the 76ers in a position to win a particular NBA championship team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was he was certainly, before that, they had always fallen prey to either Boston or the Lakers, and they of course all had very talented inside players. Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish for Boston, Kareem for the Lakers, and the Sixers had two capable guys, Caldwell Jones and Darryl Dawkins, but they weren't the player that Moses was. Moses was a multi-time MVP in Houston. He had been a multi-time rebounding champion, and they needed that one hard hat to kind of get him where they needed to go, and that turned out to be the perfect acquisition for their team. They ended up trading Caldwell Jones and a first-round draft pick who turned out to be Rodney McRae for Moses, and he fit in right away, and it was an instant chemistry with Julius Erving and Andrew Toney and Maurice Cheeks and all those guys. So it was quite a team, and Moses was the exact ingredient that they had lacked. The one guy that you really had to account for inside. He was known for his offensive rebounding in particular, to the point that people sometimes suspected that he missed on purpose to kind of pad his stats, but he was the guy. I mean, they started that season 57-9, and then cruised through the playoffs. They won 12 out of 13 playoff games, and swept the Lakers in the finals. The Lakers had some injuries, which really factored into the sweep. James Worthy missed the series. Bob McAdoo didn't play much, and Norm Nixon got hurt in Game 1. And I suspect they wouldn't have swept him if those guys had been there, but it just felt like it was the Sixers' year that year.
Well, let's backstep, because I'm a big Los Angeles Lakers fan, and I got to be honest, I dreaded Philadelphia. I didn't like that team. There was a lot of bitterness that particular year. But when the Los Angeles Lakers played the Sixers on December the 5th, 1982, they were full strength, and the Sixers came into the Forum and pretty much easily beaten the Lakers in that particular game. They had a rematch a month later, I believe a game that you had attended, January the 5th, 1983. Kareem was out of that game. Seemed like the Lakers, for some reason, might play a little bit better when Kareem is out. But I don't think anybody was going to stop that particular 76ers team. I think they were on a mission. They were committed, and Moses Malone just had a dominating particular season.
Yeah. Yeah, that January 5th game, that's one of the greatest games I've ever seen. I mean, Magic had a triple double, and Julius had a big game, and Andrew Toney won the game in overtime with a little jumper in traffic. But that's there's video from that game that's often shown, that the famous Julius Erving rock the baby dunk over Michael Cooper that's shown again and again to this day.
Mm-hmm.
That happened that day. So it was quite a game between the defending champions and the champions to be, and I think the Sixers made something of a statement that day. It was kind of a shame that Kareem didn't play. As you know, he had migraines throughout his career, and he couldn't play that day because of that. But it was a wonderful game nonetheless, and the Lakers had a great team even without him. they were a deep, versatile team, and it was just kind of the Sixers' day, and ultimately the Sixers' year.
Now, as a sports writer, you attend a lot of the games, particularly, let's say, the games at the Spectrum.
Right.
Was that one of the loudest arenas in basketball, or was it just? I mean, it seemed like to me, listening to it on television, it was a very loud arena, and I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty accurate. It was. I mean, the arenas then weren't quite as massive as they are now. I mean, the Sixers arena currently, which is across the parking lot from where the Spectrum used to stand, is much more massive, much more of a multi-event kind of thing. As with all arenas, they operate best when there's always something going on, and that's always the case at their current place. But the Spectrum was smaller and much more compact, and the sound really really stayed, kind of concentrated on the court, and the fans were much closer to the court. So yeah, I'd say that's accurate. And the other thing is I'd say is in the playoffs in particular, I've always thought that the sound of the crowd in the playoffs is there's something special about it. It's they're a little more attuned to what's going on, a little more engulfed in the action, and that certainly seemed to be the case that year. I mean, they had been close before, as you mentioned. They lost in '82 in the finals. They lost in '80 in the finals. They lost in '77 in the finals. And in 1981, they were up 3-1 over Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they lost that series. So they had a lot of disappointment leading up to that. And that was the other factor. Beside Moses, that team was just, always pushing the boulder up the mountain. And they finally figured out how to get to the very top that year.
Gordy, some people say not only is this 1982-83 Philadelphia 76ers team one of the top 5 greatest teams of all time, but they could be the best team of all time. Do you have any opinions to kind of give evidence that this team, this particular year, could be the best team in professional basketball of all time?
It's so hard to compare eras. The game has changed a lot. They don't allow hand checking as much as they did back in that era. The game's far less physical. Obviously, the three-pointer is, a big factor in how the game is played today. So, I mean, it's got to be in a discussion, I would think. I mean, you look at, for instance, the 85-86 Celtics. They were a great team. They went 40-1 at home. They had Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, and just a really deep team. Some of the current not the current Warriors teams, but the recent Warriors teams have to be in the discussion somewhere just because of the way they revolutionized the game. Certainly some of those Lakers teams also. And go back to some of the Bill Russell Celtics teams in the 60s. So I find it really difficult to compare eras, but I think they're somewhere in the discussion. My suspicion is that they're not quite as deep as some of those teams. I mean, Bobby Jones and Clint Richardson were great reserve players, but if you look at like the 85-86 Celtics, you can go down to the Scott Wedmans of the world and people who barely played but were all-star players elsewhere. So I don't know. I think they're there somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure where.
Well, wasn't it at one point during the season it was some expectations that the Sixers were going to try to win 70 games? I remember hearing that throughout the season, that they were on pace to win 70 games. What kind of derailed that, I guess, ability to win 70 games for that particular team.
Yeah, they were 57-9 at one point, and Moses had some issues with tendonitis in his knees late in the regular season, and there was some concern. They finished 65-17, so they got close. My suspicion has always been, had they held on to Caldwell Jones rather than trading him for Moses, that they would have won 70, because he would have been a nice insurance policy and really could have started alongside Moses, but they elected to include him in that trade to Houston for Moses, when in actuality they probably didn't even have to. They signed Moses to an offer sheet, and Houston, the way it worked then, the team that the player had previously played for could either match it or let him walk. And Houston was fully prepared to just let him walk, but the Sixers decided, well, let's make sure that we get this done, so we're going to include Caldwell Jones in that trade, which actually kind of rankled some of the players and coaches with whom Caldwell had played in Philadelphia, because he was the ultimate unselfish guy, the ultimate great teammate. And in fact, Moses had known him from the ABA, and at first he didn't realize that Caldwell was part of the trade, and he was really very much disappointed that he had been, because he wanted to play with him. Everybody loved Caldwell. He played forever and just was a very respected, unselfish player that everybody wanted to have around. But and I suspect if they would have kept him around, that they would have won 70. Here's an interesting sidelight to Caldwell also. Billy Cunningham, the coach of that 76ers team, so beloved Caldwell that the following year, in 1983-84, he tried to give Caldwell his championship ring, and Caldwell being Caldwell, he turned it down. But that was he was a very respected guy, and I suspect would have been an integral part of the team had he stayed there.
Well, what about Clement Johnson's when they made the pick, I guess, during the season, picking up him as a backup center? You had Earl Currington. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Clement was a no nonsense guy. He came in and he was a physical presence and a really good backup for Moses. That was a nice midseason pickup. They picked up Clement Johnson from Indiana and also Reggie Johnson from San Antonio. And they were kind of just insurance policies. Reggie didn't play much down the stretch or in the playoffs, but he was an accomplished player and could have filled in had they needed him. But and Earl Currington, he's an interesting case too. His only basket of the playoffs was in Game 2 of the finals. He hit a hook shot over Kareem because Moses was in foul trouble. So that was kind of an interesting situation that he kind of plugged in and did that.
Mm-hmm. Stan, do you remember this particular team in that year? I don't know if you was paying attention, and because you was up here in Connecticut. So, do you have any memories, or do you have anything you want to ask the guests about this particular team and subject?
No. As I was mentioning, I might watch a finals of any particular sport, but I'm too obsessive about things. So I can't. If I get into sports, I'm gonna get like all the way in.
Right.
I'm just enjoying the conversation because I'm always love to hear sports fans talk because they go in deep.
Okay.
It's like you guys are watching the game all over again.
All right.
So
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Gordy, also one thing, I don't know if this has ever happened before, but during the All-Star game, the 76ers had 4 players that actually played in the All-Star game. You can't actually have more than 4 players to play in an All-Star game from on one team. Obviously, Moses Malone, Julius Erving, they definitely deserve to be in the All-Star game. Do you think Maurice Cheeks and Andrew Toney was having such an exceptional year that they also deserve to be in the All-Star game for that particular season?
Yeah, Andrew Toney was a really kind of a forgotten great player, and he was great that year and certainly deserved to be there. And Cheeks as well. Cheeks was, just a defensive presence and a guy who just got everybody organized and was really an exceptional point guard. And I think they both belong there. And, Maurice is now in the Hall of Fame, which it surprised me that when he got chosen, but I was happy for him because he was a guy that was always lurking in the shadows and was very respected and everybody knew how great he was. and Andrew would have been there, but he had some foot problems later in his career, and that really kind of derailed his career, which was really kind of a shame because he was a really explosive player. And I would have really been curious to see how his career would have played out because after Julius retired, after Moses moved on, after Bobby Jones retired, to have a team in the late 80s that has Charles Barkley and Andrew Toney as your key guys, I think that would have been a very interesting team.
Well, actually, I mean, the year going into the finals, the Sixers really didn't have much of I guess, a problem. I mean, of which I guess a challenge if you really look at it. They swept the Knicks in 4 games. They beat the Bucks, a team that they always used to play in the playoffs. They beat them in 5 games, and then they would end up going against the Lakers, sweeping them in 4 games. Does that postseason to you kind of stand out as one of the best postseasons? How they was able to go and beat 3 different teams?
Yeah, it was quite something. I mean, Moses there's some people who debate whether he actually said it or whether it was sort of a columnist kind of taking liberties and kind of saying that he said it or saying that he would have said it, that he said faux, faux, faux before the playoffs. And in fact, on the Sixers championship rings, it said faux 5 faux. But I stand by what Bill Lyon, the late Philadelphia Inquirer columnist, once said. He said that if Moses didn't say it, he should have. So, so let's stick with that. And at any rate, it was just, as with the regular season, certainly the first 66 games of the regular season, every game was kind of the same. They just came out and just laid the wood to people. That's just what they did. I mean, they had some challenges every now and then. As you mentioned, they lost Game 4 of the Milwaukee series. That was the only game they lost. And the Knicks actually gave them a couple close games. The Knicks are actually up 20 in one of the playoff games, and the Sixers came back on them. So there were challenges along the way, but nothing that they were unable to overcome.
Yeah, I remember Moses Malone dribbling the ball behind his back, or he did some type of spin move, and I said after that, I don't know if anybody could beat this team. I didn't because I didn't. Go ahead.
That was something. He kind of saved the ball at the sideline, and he got the ball back and went behind his back and made a little finger roll. It was like this full court excursion against the Knicks in the Garden. It was really quite something, especially for a guy like that, who is obviously not known for his ball handling, not a guy you want to have the ball out in the open court, and yet he kind of did that. So it was quite a team and quite a season. And it's always interesting to me too, just how you always had Moses and Julius there. They were always doing the heavy lifting, but you always had chances for other guys to kind of chip in and have their little solos. Like Franklin Edwards made a game-winning shot in the Knicks series. Bobby Jones had some exceptional plays in clutch moments in the Milwaukee series. So you always had guys stepping up at different moments to get the job done, and that was kind of their hallmark. They were just a complete team from top to bottom.
Well, I think the key that you just said was it was a team. I mean, Bobby Jones, a defensive specialist, Mark Ivoroni, sort of like doing the grunt work, the dirty work.
Yep.
Andrew Toney was like a killer shooter. He could drive you to the basket. He can knock down a 3-point shot. So it had a complete team. Clint Richardson was a good backup, fast point guard or guard. So they was pretty much solid all across the board. The defense kind of really stands out for that particular team also. They were a real top defensive team. But to go along with the 76ers team, you really can't, I think, even though I'm not a 76ers fan, they had this PA, Dave Zinkoff, who had one of the most, I guess, voices that really people used to love to want to talk like him. I guess explain a little bit about Dave Zinkoff. What kind of makes him so colorful as the
Well, the interesting thing about that era, this is another thing about comparing eras of NBA basketball. As we know now, it's become kind of this complete entertainment experience with videos and audios and dance teams and pep squads and this and that, and people, firing T-shirt cannons into the crowd. I mean, it's just how it is now. But in that era, you didn't have any of that. So Zinkoff was kind of the just a one-man show, and he had this kind of nasally voice, and he kind of had a real impish sense of humor. Like he would announce a license plate early in the game and say, "Your lights are on, your doors are locked, and your motor is humming." And of course, that got a charge. And then later in the game, he would give the same license plate number and say, "The doors are still locked, the motor is still running, and the lights are dimming." He would say things like that. So he had a real sense of humor about his delivery, and it really he had this way of saying, for instance, if they were playing the Celtics, which was always, as you well know, a fierce rivalry, and he would say, "Celtics call time," and it was always. I always thought there was just the right amount of derision in that. The way he delivered that, as if to say, "You guys have a little problem over there or something." So he was really kind of an amusing, kind of impish guy. And the thing that always fascinates me is, again, getting back to the fact that it was a different era. You had all these Runyon-esque characters like him, and you had Harvey Pollack, who's kind of revolutionized the way stats were kept, and he was kind of an interesting guy. And yeah, Jack McMahon, who was this grandfatherly assistant coach and just known for, beating the bushes and finding players in unexpected places, like Maurice Cheeks from West Texas State and Andrew Toney from Southwest Louisiana and Clinton Richardson from up in Seattle. So he just beat the bushes and found these guys. And Al Domenico, who was like this former Marine who was the trainer, and he used to do things like whenever a player was traded, he would cut the head off of the player in the team picture and post it on a bulletin board in his trainer's room in the Spectrum. And it would say, "To our fallen heroes," it would say. So these guys are all kind of added a real color to that team. It was a really interesting team and an interesting era. And you don't really see that as much anymore. Now everything's very corporate and homogenized, and there's not as much individuality, I would dare say. So it was kind of an interesting era that way too.
And then this NBA fan that you had, I guess, told me his name, because I used to always watch the games when they used to put them on television. And just one fan that would always get so enthusiastic and just excited. I mean, and I couldn't. I said, "Who is this guy?" What's his name? Was Steve Salmon? You said?
Steve Solms, S-O-L-M-S.
Solms. Okay.
Yeah, he's no longer with us, but he was a real estate developer, and he was one of those folks who sat in the front row of the stands along the one sideline opposite the benches in the Spectrum. So he was one of their super fans, and he was a guy. He was fully immersed in everything, as you mentioned. He was a very enthusiastic fan, and he was the guy that when Julius Erving came to town, he had been signed when actually purchased from the Nets when the ABA and the NBA merged. So when Julius was introduced before his first game early in the 1976-77 season, Steve Solms was the guy who came out and handed Dr. J a doctor's bag. So he was kind of part of the whole scene as well.
Well, he went crazy when Julius Erving did the cradle dunk, because they show clips of him, and I mean this guy.
Yeah, he was a very visible presence, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That is for sure, and made that team special and that era special as well.
Was you said that you were, I guess, a sports writer for the 76ers as far back as 1980.
Yep.
Were you at the NBA Finals in 1980? Did you cover the Sixers that particular year as well?
No, not that year. It wasn't until the 1981-82 season that I really kind of started covering that.
And then the late Chuck Daly, he passed away, so he was not part of. He left the Sixers in 81 or 82 as the assistant coach?
It was before the championship season. He went and he spent a year coaching the Cavaliers. I mean, when Billy Cunningham became the coach early in the 77-78 season, it was a first-time coach, and they decided, and rightfully so, that he would need some veterans to help him along. And Chuck Daly was one of those that they hired away from the University of Pennsylvania, and Jack McMahon was the other one. And so they kind of, nurtured his development as a coach. And it was interesting about Billy because he had been a high scoring guy when he played, and he wasn't known for his defense at all, but he wanted to reshape that team. When he first started coaching, they had Julius, they had George McGinnis, they had World B. Free, they had Joe Bryant, they had Darryl Dawkins, they had all these guys, and it was a star-studded team, but it wasn't really a connected team. It was more of an individualistic team, and defense was not really part of their makeup. So they remade that team, notably before the 78-79 season. They traded McGinnis to Denver for Bobby Jones, and they drafted Mo Cheeks in the second round, which is kind of amazing to think of today because he was such a talented guy. So those two moves in one off season really kind of went a long way toward reshaping the team and making them more of a defensive-oriented team than they had been.
Where did Doug Collins fit in? Because wasn't Doug Collins part of the Sixers during that span as well?
Yeah, he had all those foot injuries that really kind of curtailed his. He was a very effective player, but his career really went downhill because of all the foot injuries he had. And I forget which season was his last season, to be honest with you, but I think it was 79-80.
I think.
But at any rate, yeah, I'd have to look, but. Doug really had. It was a shame because he was a really gifted player, but it just didn't work out physically for Doug. And as you well know, Doug later coached the team. In fact, it was the early 2010s when he coached the team, right before they embarked on their whole tear it down and build it back up thing, which came to be known as the process.
Gordy, do you look at Andrew Toney as the X factor of that team?
Oh yeah, for sure. He was fearless, and he could, as you mentioned, he could beat you from deep. He could beat you off the dribble, and he just, they called him the Boston Strangler because he had so many big games against the Celtics. In fact, I think the quintessential Andrew Toney game is Game 7 of the '82 Eastern Finals against Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Because as in the previous year, the Sixers went up 3-1 in the series, and then Boston won the next two. So now you're going back to Boston, tied 3-3, and you think it's going to happen again. And then Andrew went up there and just wore them out. He had 34, and they tried everybody against him. They had ML Carr on him. They had Chris Ford. They had Quinn Buckner. They had Danny Ainge on him, and he just wore them all out. And it was a really big-time performance in a clutch setting. One of my favorite Andrew stories is when he was a rookie, 79-80. He's walking into Boston Garden for the first time, and as you know, there's a train station below the Garden, so they let him off there, and he's walking around. He's going, "Where's the gym at?" As if to say, I'm not impressed by this place. I can play anywhere. I don't care if it's Boston Garden. I don't care if Bill Russell played here. I just want to get into the gym and go at these guys. And that was Andrew. He had no fear.
Well, I'm going to be honest. As a Lakers fan, I used to always wanted to model my game like Andrew Toney because that first quick, he had like a first quick step. They say he really wasn't fast, but he was very quick. He could go from, I guess, the outside to driving in the lane so quickly. And I just thought that guy was just explosive, how he could shoot. He was just a deadly, like you say, had he not gotten injured, and he would have kept that same pace, he definitely would have been a Hall of Fame player. He was just really
there's no doubt in my mind. It's just a terrible shame that his career got derailed the way it was because, as you mentioned, he was quick, he was strong, and he was just fearless. He just wanted everybody. He just went at everybody. He didn't care about your reputation. Mm-hmm. He just knew that you were the guy standing between him and where he wanted to go, and that's what he was going to do. He was going to go at you, and he was a really unique guy that way.
Stan, does your father like the 76ers? I think I asked you this question before. You said he's more like a football fan. So
no, he's 76ers.
He's a 76ers
Sixers,
fan? Okay.
Eagles, Phillies.
Okay. Was he? Did you talk to him when they won that championship? Do you remember anything about this particular championship team? Was anything that kind of?
No, I was not that much of a.
Okay, so you don't.
We this was for me like in my growing up in Philly. The Flyers were really big for 2 years, and everyone played street hockey. It was very, very big, and I grew up in Bucks County, which is outside of Philly, and no one was in school that day. They closed the school because of Flyers Parade. So our world was more in playing street hockey everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I missed out on the Philadelphia. I missed out on the whole basketball era coming
There,
because of street hockey.
Well, again, Gordy, I mean, where does the 76ers kind of stand for Philadelphia? Is they one of the, if you had to say for Philadelphia sports teams, would the Sixers be the number one team, or is it the Eagles? Is it the Flyers? Is it the Phillies?
It's the Eagles far and away. It's the Eagles have really kind of they dwarf everybody else now.
Oh,
and I think the Phillies just went to the World Series, so I think the Sixers are probably no better than third on the list at this point. It's just because of circumstances, and they've been unable to get over the hump. They haven't been out of the second round since of the playoffs since 2001 when Iverson took them to the finals. So it's been a long drought, and they're kind of in a really odd place right now because James Harden just opted into his contract, but they want to orchestrate a trade, and I'm not sure there's a great one out there for them. And even if there is, I'm not sure where that leaves them. I get the fact that they want to move on from Harden, but at the same time, I don't know how you replace at least his regular season production, and I don't know, how they get better from trading Harden. So they have Joel Embiid, who's obviously just a transformational player, just a guy you want to build around, but I'm not sure what the next move is as far as getting them where they want to be.
Yeah, but Gordy, at that time, back in 82, 83, I think everybody throughout the country had three NBA teams. Either you were a Lakers, Celtics, or Philadelphia 76ers team. Unless your local area where you live at, obviously you would root for them. But if you took a neutral place like Connecticut here and other parts of the country, and the Sixers and the Lakers and the Celtics just seemed like they were the main top three teams. I mean, were they that successful that they just stood out? I guess you can put a lot of other factors like Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Julius Erving, kind of like the showmanship of the game. But I just think that if you asked anybody, and when I was going to school, which NBA team would you like, it's usually one of those three teams.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a different era because the games weren't on every night, so you didn't have exposure for every team in every city. But it was those three certainly dominated that era. Particularly as it turned out, the Lakers and the Celtics. I mean, in the '80s, the Lakers won 5 titles and the Celtics won 3. And the Sixers kind of interrupted that one year. In fact, the following year, as you well know, they lost in the first round to the New Jersey Nets, which was a considerable upset. And I guess it's a testimony to just how much of a toll that championship run took on that team. So, those three teams were really kind of the dominant ones. I mean, Milwaukee had a great team, but they could never get through Boston or Philly. I mean, they're really some exceptional players like, Marcus Johnson and guys like that, but they could just never get over the hump against those three teams.
Well, how'd you feel if maybe Moses Malone would have went to Milwaukee? They would have been odds-on favorite. You think he was that good a player that he could have made the difference between one team over the other?
Yeah, because the Bucks of that era, they kind of were floundering around trying to find find a big guy themselves, and they brought Dave Cowens in when he was sort of at the end of the line. And in fact, they gave up Quinn Buckner to get him. And Quinn had been a pretty important guy for Milwaukee. They brought Jack Sickman when he was kind of at the end of the line, and they had kind of run-of-the-mill guys like the Randy Brewers and the Paul Mokeskis of the world to try to fill out their front line. But they were just always kind of a player short. They had a bunch of really talented guys. I love their team, Mickey Johnson and Brian Winters and Junior Bridgman, guys like that. I mean, they just had some guys who could really, really score, but they just didn't have that one hard hat that would really do it for them.
Well, were you at, or do you remember the 81 Eastern Conference semifinals between the Bucks and the 76ers when it came down to Game 7 in the Spectrum?
No, that was a little bit before I started covering the team. I remember that they had, what was it, 8,000 in the Spectrum for Game 7 because it was, I think, Mother's Day and the Phillies were playing across the street or something like that, and so it was a really odd thing that they played a Game 7 and they had 8,000 people there, which was really kind of a troubling thing for basketball fans, certainly in the city.
Yeah, I think that was Easter Sunday actually.
At least, there you go. I knew it was a holiday. I couldn't forget. I couldn't remember what it was. Yeah, okay, I think you're right.
And I watched that game. That was a very exciting game. It came down. I think the Sixers held the ball. They ran the clock out. They couldn't foul them.
Right.
That game was back and forth. So I guess the competitiveness that the Sixers and other teams brought during that era was very exciting, good for the NBA. But obviously the Sixers from that 83 championship team have never been able to win another championship. Did this kind of surprise you that they broke up the team sort of in '86, trading Moses Malone and giving up their draft pick? I believe they had Brad Daugherty, I believe, and then somehow they screwed that up and made some changes.
Yeah, they made two trades on the eve of the draft in '86. They traded Moses to Washington for Jeff Rulin and Cliff Robinson. And they traded the first overall pick, which turned out to be Brad Daugherty, to Cleveland for Roy Hinson, and it just really derailed them for, as you might imagine, because it just didn't work out. Rulin was never healthy. Cliff Robinson and Roy Hinson never really worked out, so it really knocked them off their axis. It was really kind of I mean, I always maintain that if you make one of those trades and not the other, you're okay. But I didn't understand the thinking. I guess they worked Daugherty out and didn't really care for him, and they didn't want to take Lenny Bias for whatever reason. I mean, who knows? Who knows if they knew something that other people didn't, but they decided they didn't want to go there. So it was they kind of outsmarted themselves and ended up making two horrible trades, and it really derailed them. And the other thing was, of course, Julius retired, Bobby retired, so the team got old in a hurry. So maybe that 82-83 would have been their only shot, just for those reasons, that they had been together for a while and those guys were kind of past their prime, so it was bound to go downhill. But certainly those two trades accelerated the downward plunge.
Well, it seemed like when they drafted Charles Barkley in '84, it was like he was the replacement sort of Julius Erving and a complement of Moses Malone. But like you say, some other factors of Bobby Jones retiring shortly after, Julius getting older and he retiring. So there was some, and then Andrew Toney with the foot injuries. Nobody really saw that coming. But didn't the owner get a lot of flack though shortly after, like he was kind of breaking up the team? Didn't he let Pat Williams, the GM, go? I mean, how did that whole thing fall apart?
Yeah, well, right after the '85-'86 draft, Pat Williams went down to Orlando to help start the Orlando Magic. He was a very respected general manager. He had been there since 1974. And also Jack McMahon left after the '86 draft. And Harold kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. He was kind of a hard-driving guy, and he had his opinions, and he was going to make his voice heard. For example, when the Sixers made the trade with Cleveland for Roy Hinson, when they traded the top overall pick, Pat Williams called up the Cleveland people and he said, can you throw in $800,000, which is, of course, a big pile of money. And he came back to Harold and said what had happened, and Harold said, well, why didn't you get $1 million? I think he was a hard-to-please guy, to say the least, and he certainly was going to make his voice heard. And he made the one move that they really needed to make shortly after buying the team when he brought Moses in. But you could certainly question a lot of the other things that occurred on his watch.
So you couldn't put him in the same category as an owner like Jerry Buss, because he just don't have the success track record that the Lakers have.
it was a one-shot deal during the Harold era, and that was it. The '82-'83 team, that was it. And after that, I mean, I think you'd certainly fairly question a lot of the things that happened on his watch.
So how are the 76ers fans or Philadelphia taking the Sixers? I mean, you say they kind of rank third. Do they have any belief that they're gonna ever get back to the finals and win it? Is that any belief that
Well,
you?
I'm beginning to want. I mean, you never know from year to year what's going to happen. I mean, strange things happen. I mean, for instance, you draft Tyrese Maxey 21st overall. You don't expect him to be the player he's turned out to be. So weird things can happen. But boy, it certainly has been a long time, and a lot of different ownership groups and general managers and this, that, and the other, and they just haven't been able to get over the hump since 2001 as far as reaching the finals, and since '83 as far as winning the finals. It's just really hard to do, and they're caught in this rut now where they can't seem to get beyond the second round, despite having Joel Embiid, who's one of the best players in the league. So it's really, you never say never. I mean, it's bound to happen at some point, you would think, but it's certainly not on the immediate horizon that they're going to get there. I don't see that. I don't think anybody does. So I wonder where they go from here. Like I said, they're kind of in an odd place now because they want to trade Harden, but I'm not sure they know where or that they know what they can get for him that would really alter the face of their team and make them appreciably better.
Did their coach Doc Rivers get fired, or did he just step down? I mean, how did that whole thing fall apart?
He got fired.
He got fired.
So now they brought in Nick Nurse, who won a title with Toronto in 2019, and in fact, that was probably as close as this era of the Sixers has gotten to really making a deep run. I mean, they lost in Game 7 in Toronto in the Eastern semis when Kawhi Leonard made the memorable shot from the corner that bounced on the rim 4 times and fell in improbably. And that was the Sixers team that had Embiid, and they had Tobias Harris, and they still had Jimmy Butler, and they had Ben Simmons, who was still, at least a rising player at that point. His career has since kind of taken a left turn, but that was probably the best team they've had in this stretch. And now, Simmons and Butler are obviously gone. Tobias Harris might very well be following them out the door because he's going into the last year of his contract. So they're still kind of shaking up the mix again. But that was as close as they've gotten to being making a real deep run. I mean, the thing about that shot is, I mean, it was an improbable shot, but if he doesn't make it, the Sixers still would have had to win in overtime on the road. A lot of people seem to forget that they think if he hadn't made that shot, the Sixers would have won the game. No, the game was tied. So they would have had to win an overtime game on the road, which would have been tough anyway, and then they would have had to win the next round just to get to the finals. But that was as close as they've come to really making some noise in this stretch.
Well, Gordy, again, I know you don't like to compare. Maybe you say it's not fair to compare different teams in different eras. But just to say some of the great NBA teams like the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan, the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe and Shaq, how would any team be able to defeat the 82-83 76ers team if, both teams are healthy and playing on their game? I mean, what would the Bulls, in your opinion, have to do with Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman? Is it like a strategy you think they could skill and set to beat that particular team?
Well, Michael was such a great player at both ends, and and then Scottie Pippen was obviously one of the great perimeter defenders and a pretty capable scorer himself. So, I don't know. I hesitate to compare teams from different eras just because the game has changed so much. But man, Michael was a force of nature. He was something else. I mean, you'd hate to ever bet against him because he was just a different kind of guy. He was just over the top great, and you not only do you debate teams, but you debate players, and any discussion of greatest players ever has to include him. It just has to. I mean, I hate the fact that Wilt Chamberlain isn't mentioned more often in those discussions because he's still all over the record book. I mean, I get the fact that he only won 2 championships, one of those in Philly in '66, '67. The other with the great Lakers team in '71, '72. And I get the fact that he was seen as a guy who was just, a stat guy and all about himself. But, boy, he belongs on that list somewhere too, right?
Right.
And obviously LeBron belongs in there somewhere. I mean, but again, it's so difficult to compare eras and how the game is played and who you would put above others. But Michael's got to be right there. He would be a hard out for any team from any era.
One last question, because we're out just about running out of time. I never saw one player give Kareem Abdul-Jabbar so much trouble as Moses or Malone. I mean, what was it about Moses that Kareem really couldn't defend? It just seems like he couldn't do anything against Moses or Malone. I mean, was it just the type of style that Malone played that gave Kareem so much trouble that particular year?
Yeah, I mean, Moses was just a whirlwind. He was just a Tasmanian devil. I mean, I've heard him described as a guy who didn't really dribble efficiently and didn't really have a pretty shot or anything like that, but he just kept coming at you, and it was really exceptional. One of the best lines that was written during that season, a columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News named Mark Wicker wrote, "Moses doesn't get tired, but he's a carrier." Meaning that he was just going to keep coming at you, and he was going to wear you out, but he was never going to get tired. And that was him. He was just going to. He was all about the effort and all about bringing his lunch pail and all about just coming at you. And Kareem was, of course, much taller, but it certainly seemed to me that there were times that this Kareem wanted no part of that guy, no part of dealing with his physicality and his relentlessness.
I've heard other people say that exact same thing. It seemed like Kareem just didn't want nothing to do with Moses. Yeah. At some point, it's like he just threw in the towel, man. This guy is just killing me. I got to be honest, as a Lakers fan, it just seemed like Kareem didn't want anything to do with Moses at that particular span and everything. Yeah, he was
coming at you, he was coming through you,
Mm-hmm. I said this was going to be the last question, but I just got to ask you this one last question. Put you on the spot. The 1982-83 76ers team, where would you rank them from a 1 through 10? I mean, out of all the greatest teams of all time, where would you put that 76ers team ranked at?
Oh, man. Well, one of the Russell teams has to be in there, and those 85-86 Celtics have to be in there. Mm-hmm. One of Michael's teams has to be in there. Probably one of Steph's teams has got to be in there. I think they're like fifth, something like that. That would be probably about right. Because, man, some of those teams are just, like I said, I just think maybe a little deeper, a little more versatile. But that team for that year, they were just on a mission. They were just not going to be denied because they had been so close so many times. And now they had the one guy that they really needed, and they just said, okay, we're just going to do this. There was a real crusade, I would say. They were just not going to be denied no matter who was in front of them. And it was just their year. So for that 1 year, boy, it's hard for me to believe anybody could beat them if, playing by those rules in that era.
Right.
They just had a sense of mission about them that they were not going to be denied.
That's a great way to end it. I mean, I think that's a good, fair way to end this particular segment. And, I mean, I really appreciate it. I had a great time. You brought a lot of fun discussions to reminisce about that particular team and other factors of professional basketball. And it was just a pleasure really interviewing you and having you as a guest. If there's any last words you want to leave the audience, feel free to do so.
No, I just really appreciate you guys having me on, and it's always great to talk hoops, so, with folks who really have an interest in it. And I could talk all day about that team and really the game in general. I just really love watching it. And my feeling about basketball, about NBA basketball in particular, is I understand the criticisms that people have of it, that the season's too long and maybe this player or that player gets away with an extra step. But still, I think they're the best players in the world, and I just always appreciate the game, and I always appreciate those who play it because they're just, they make hard things look really easy. And I just I just really appreciate how they go about their business.
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it, Gordy. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. I appreciate you, Jonathan.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Stan. Be well.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I don't know if that really stood out as 1983, as I was mentioning, but it took place.
I know you wanted to talk about 1983.
Yeah.
Jones is like 1983's coming. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is he talking about? 1983.
But I mean, this did actually participate mostly in 1983. The NBA season starts off late October, maybe the first day of November, but most of the season is in the next year. So it is a 1983 event. I don't know if it's a national. Well, it is a national. Anytime an NBA team win the finals, Dr. J, everybody was kind of rooting for him, you know, because he was never able to win an NBA finals. So it's not the Thriller segment that I really wanted to do with Michael Jackson's album, but it was the best I could come up with.
Well, it was
under
good. It was very,
circumstances.
very good. I could see the game unfolding as you guys were talking about it, and yeah. I don't really watch basketball that much. You know, I have family that loves the game. Fixed, and I have friends, of course, that you can't call them when the game is on. You can't call them. You can't talk to them during the season because they're so glued to the TV. And then you know you have the college basketball season with the Sweet 16. You know that whole
that's what I love.
March
really.
Madness, and so.
Yeah, I'm more into college basketball, but at that time era, I was definitely heavily into the NBA, as I mentioned. That's how come I can remember so many things about that span.
You remember all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean,
but he was on top of his game too, though. This guy Gordy, he remembers a lot. But
I mean, you guys, it's fun listening to people who are enthusiasts about anything. But particularly about sports, because they get into it, you know. Yo, yeah, my man, and he wore the Converse. Remember, he had like the blue Converse and the red Converse, and and so folk get into it.
Well, one thing, you know, I like the past. I mean, I guess I heard you and McCauley, y'all are two science fictions. Y'all can watch science fiction.
Science fiction movies. Now McCall's gonna call me.
And talk for 4 or 5 hours.
Which I never mind having a conversation with McCall, but you know, a 3-hour conversation with him
minimum
that's a short conversation. Because we can talk on the phone for 4 hours. Easy. Real easy. But let's take a short break. All right. And then we will be right back. It's Morning Talk. I'm here with Jonathan Small. We'll take a break and come back on the other side. Don't go anywhere.
Hey, Hartford, Connecticut, I'm talking to you. We got to get out and vote. Vote for Stan McCauley. It's our time. We got to rise up and take it back. Vote for Stan McCauley. Vote for Stan. You gotta vote for Stan McCauley. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Oh yeah.
It's more than politics than just what your social covers. And it ain't somewhere written down in bold letters. Don't just take my word for it, do your research. Think of your future, look at your bigger picture. Suit and tie, clean up, unity for the righteous. Plotting on action, hands-on access. With a light source vision, door-to-door knocking. Guerrilla style marketing, brainstorm as a collective. Real neighborhood suggestions. Only we know what it is where we living. To make real life decisions. Move on facts, make it manifest back.
You gotta vote for Stan McCauley. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Oh yeah. Look at your city. Stop. Take a look around. Is opportunity flow into your house? Are you working? Wait, can you save some money? And is your neighborhood safe? Or is it a homicide every night? Ooh. vote, we can change it, yeah.
Hi, my name is Marlon E. Starler Sr. Many of you may know me as the two-time welterweight champion of the world. I'm here to tell you that Democrat J. Stan McCauley, as our next mayor, will fight for you until the last bell. Help me throw a knockout punch. Go out and vote for Stan the Man.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I approve this message.
Morning Talk, welcome back. J. Stan McCauley here with Jonathan Small. So, what are your big plans for the week? You got big holiday coming up tomorrow.
You mean tomorrow? I'm still trying to figure out what to do. I missed out on something Saturday because I had to go to work. So somebody had some birthday party that day. I could have went, but I couldn't really get. They didn't tell me in time to really make any plans. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna try to find some place to go. Somebody who's having a cookout, man, just to really kick back.
There you go. go. What do you call it? When you go to your crash. Yeah, let's do some 4th of July party crash and drive around the city looking for barbecues to crash. If you're having a barbecue tomorrow and you would like to have us come by and eat up all your food.
Right. Yeah, I gotta find somebody who's having a cookout or something.
Yeah, I'll bring the fork.
But yeah, it's gonna be one holiday off that day, so it kind of works out nice. And before I get into some heavy topics, because I know usually we always talk heavy, but I want to keep it a little bit light. One more segment with the science fiction type of shows. You like Star Wars, right? Like the move, like Star Trek, Star Wars.
Well, I like anything science fiction, really. I mean, Star Wars, the new stuff is really good. Andor, the Mandalorian,
right?
Ahsoka. There's a lot of stuff coming out of the Disney Star Wars camp, which is really good.
But I can never get into that Star Trek, though. Even the
Star Trek is like old school. It's original. Yeah. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise. Some of the new stuff is just like not worth my time.
Yeah, but even the original Star Trek, I just could never get into it, man. I mean, maybe it just wasn't my cup of tea, or I didn't really program myself.
You're not a science fiction guy.
I'm not a science.
You're a sports guy.
But no, I do. Me and Michael talked about this. I did love the Buck Rogers TV show and the movies.
Goodness. Buck Rogers going way back.
Yeah, but
I was a
kid, but I thought that was the bomb, man. Buck Rogers.
Well,
you couldn't tell anybody
like
about
Bugs
that.
Bunny and things like that. You go way back. Mighty Mouse.
Yeah,
Underdog and things.
But see, you saying Star Trek, like the original William Shatner back in the '60s. That was before my time. But even the reruns, I just can't get into that.
Well, it had run its course. By the time you were younger, you were that wave was ahead. That wave had already passed. So we're riding on that wave. The William Shatner. Star Trek only had 3 years.
3 years. That's what I'm saying.
There's the Desilu. Lucille Ball. If it wasn't for Lucille Ball, there would be no Star Trek. Yes.
But that was all about the space era of John F. Kennedy planning to go to the moon. I mean, that was the whole era. Was that something like that?
Everybody was into things spacey. But for our age, Star Trek had become a cult kind of following after just the 3 years. So there's a whole generation that grew up on Star Trek, and it was an older generation than you, so you wouldn't be into it.
But even the new, didn't they come up with like a
The newer, next generation?
The next generation.
Next generation was good too, because it, you know. But some people just aren't into science fiction.
Yeah. Now, Battlestar Galactica, I did like that.
Battlestar Galactica, the original?
The original one.
Have you seen the remake?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my gosh. It's like one of the best series ever. It's in the top 5. Breaking Bad, The Wire.
Right.
And Battlestar Galactica. I'm serious. There's 84 episodes. I've seen the whole series at least 3 times. 84 episodes. I've seen it 3 times.
3 times.
Yes.
So you heavy into that.
Battlestar Galactica is very, very good. I think I've seen Breaking Bad twice. I've never finished the entire Wire. The Wire is generally thought of as number 1.
Right.
Breaking Bad is, I think, 2. Battlestar's. I had heard some people say Battlestar was 3. You know, it depends on who you're listening to, but yeah.
But they all had the same concept. Even like the Buck Rogers, like was 2,500.
Buck Rogers, I didn't like Buck Rogers.
You didn't like Buck Rogers?
Yeah, with the little thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
I know you're talking about the little robot.
The little robot.
Yeah, Tweaky or whatever they call his name.
Bibby or something.
Bibby,
like
Bibby.
Yeah,
all that. But they were trying to portray like the new Chicago or whatever, because he was from Chicago, and so he fell asleep or something, or he was in a deep freeze, and then he wakes up 500 years later. So is that how the world really gonna look? 2,500 or 2,480? That's something like that. People, robots every place, and it was just a.
Well, they won't look like the robots in that era, because that era of robots was very boxy looking. Now we have, of course, androids like Data. And you actually have humanoid android type robots now that are like real. They're actually real. They're very frightening, actually.
Right. Science fiction.
No, science fact now.
Science fact.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if you can say the $6 Million Man was a science fiction
Steve Austin.
show. Steve Austin. I love that one. Yeah, rebuild him. You remember that? Yeah.
Right. And the noise and
the slow motion.
Yeah.
That's what.
Since he can't run fast, we'll slow the film down. Make it look like he's running.
Yeah.
Fast.
And he was just. I love that show. See, I don't know if you classify that as science fiction, but making somebody bionic.
I think that's science fiction.
That
classifies as science fiction.
And he had 2 legs.
2 legs, 1 arm.
1 arm, and the eye.
And a bionic eye. And I think he had a bionic ear too. Couldn't he?
No, that was the bionic woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good show too.
Yeah, yeah.
But then Oscar Goldman, if you remember the OSI.
Yeah, Oscar. That's right. Yeah, good old Oscar.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that's back when they used to show you everything. You get out of the car, walk across the parking lot, come through the lobby, go up the steps. At least 20 flights. They carry everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I probably got to do is just get someone from a TV expert and cover a lot of different shows.
Oh, there's plenty of people out there that go in deep with all of the programs. Adam 12.
Yeah.
Starsky and Hutch, Beretta.
Oh yeah, those are the cop shows back
Miami
in the days.
Vice.
Oh yeah, I love that now. But what's this guy McCloud though? He rides the horse from New Mexico.
Yeah, he was a law enforcement.
A law enforcement. Now I love that show.
McMillan and Wife.
Yeah, I watched that a little bit. McMillan, but Dallas was really one of my top 5 shows. JR. I guess you probably watched the Who Shot JR episode, because that was the big one.
I was working.
Right, okay.
So I was those things came out when I was, I've always worked second shift.
That's right, because they come on at 9 o'clock.
So those shows came on at night. I probably could watch the whole entire Dallas offering, and it would be like a first time viewing.
First time, yeah. That's right. You was working at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what you want to keep it light, or you want to go into some heavy topics?
Hey, John, it's up to you. I go where you guys go.
Well, I mean, we talk about heaviness every single week. And
well, you can keep it light.
Yeah.
We try to keep it light on Friday.
So you can keep it.
And sometimes it gets heavy, but we try to keep Friday is the light show. Wednesday's controversial. And Mondays is generally very, very informative with a little bit of heavy.
Well, I don't know, man. What you think homicides? I mean, the mass shooting in Baltimore, kids having a block party, 30 people get shot. It's just
you're seeing the wheels coming off of society. Because the great weightier issues of our time and era are not discussed. We live in a land of entertainment. We want to be entertained, and then things that are going on in the real world we don't want to know about. But every once in a while it breaks through and we hear about them. Then we're forced to deal with it almost like it's a distraction. Like someone turned the light on in the movie theater and is throwing popcorn, that kind of a thing. Every time I come here, you're throwing popcorn. Stop it so I can enjoy the rest of my movie. But these things are outward manifestations of bigger problems within the society that no one really wants to address. They just want to take, if we get rid of guns, then people stop being mean to each other. That's not, they douse everybody with, nitric acid or throw gasoline in a room, get balloons filled with gasoline and throw them inside a room and light a match. People are dealing with some serious, serious issues. And as a society, we don't want to deal with those issues. So we expect someone else to do them. But it's us. We have to deal with these things. There's a big problem with gun violence. But the bigger problem is the violence. And violence is an outward manifestation of a different issue. This should be treated as a public health issue. And you come up with a cure. We recently came off of a global health issue, and all the forces of medicine and government and everything else came together to try to find something to resolve the issue. Whether or not that worked, another subject for another day. But they tried to do something. No one is trying to do anything about the violence.
Well, the only thing I will say, somewhat of a disagreement, is whoever had the gun in the car, I think they do have some surveillance cameras of the car that shot people in Baltimore. The people that did the shooting, I don't want to put them as a health problem. Those are hardened criminals.
No. Don't get me wrong. What they did is criminal. But the shootings across the board within this country, when I say public health issue, violence is an outward manifestation of an inward problem.
Right.
And until you deal with the problem that is being manifest in violence, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, even locally, I think they had some issues from the police, and I usually don't get into Hartford. I think you and Luis, y'all talk more about the Hartford police issues, the unions issues, what they're saying that the Hartford Police Department is understaffed. They got issues with Mayor Luke Bronin and Chief. What was the Hartford Police
Chief
Union
Thody.
president?
Well, I mean, this is not shocking news to anybody. I mean, I stood on the steps of City Hall calling for the chief's resignation. You can see it. You can see my commentary along with other members of the Greater Hartford African American Alliance. We were the only group in Hartford actually calling for his resignation. And we stood on the steps of City Hall. And Fox 61 News covered it. There's a 20-minute interview that you can watch where we talked about every last thing that the union is talking about way back then.
Like last year.
This would be the eventuality of the conditions that we were talking about.
The thing about it is Mayor Luke Bronin, he held a press conference that same day, but I can't seem to find it. I really wanted to hear.
He thought we were being disingenuous, semi-reckless, and we were ill-informed, and he was exceedingly dismissive.
No, I mean, he held a press conference this past week.
You're talking about this week?
When the police union rep, chief or whoever this person is, made those comments, he held a press conference the same day. It might have been a private press conference, and I just can't seem to find that press conference on air. I don't know. But I really wanted to hear what he had to say to respond to what the police, was it the police union, Stewart, that made the comment?
The president.
The president, yes. I really want to hear what Mayor Luke Bronin had to say during his press conference, because I don't want to say the mayor tries to downplay crime. He will come out and say it's a serious problem, but I don't know. And I think what you said last week, you just feel you could do a better job as mayor, for the city of Hartford. Not so much that, all these problems, but you just feel like you could do a better job. But these are some hard issues. I mean, when you talk, somebody got killed today in Hartford. So these are some hard issues that you're talking about. If adding more police to the Hartford Police Department is a good start, would you like to see 500 police officers, or would you think that's the problem?
We need as many police officers as is necessary to do the job.
Okay, that's fair.
It is clear that we are understaffed because police officers are leaving the department. You will break its capacity to maintain order. And that is an unacceptable issue. Public safety is not a political issue. Public safety is a public safety issue. And there's a certain level of responsibility that those that are elected to represent the constituency in the management of the city have to maintain and keep public order and public safety, which goes a lot further than just the police. The fire department, the flood control. I mean, it goes on. There's a lot of things involved in keeping the city safe. And it takes human capital to do that. And if that human capital dips below, you have an issue. So what happens if, God forbid, 30 people are at a retirement party and they all get food poisoning.
Right.
30 police officers. And they all get food poisoning. And they had to have their stomachs pumped and they're out of work for 3 weeks. Now what? Who's going to cover for that?
Yeah.
So, state police, you got the federal government.
I was just going to say that.
What are you going to do? If you don't have, people take vacations. They have accrued sick time, vacation time. If you don't have enough police officers to do to fulfill their shift, and this is not limited to the police, it's any workforce. So, in your job,
right,
if you don't have enough people doing the work, and you're working overtime, and you get a little bit tired, and you're not paying attention, you could get sucked into the intake of an aircraft.
Well, that actually just happened recently.
Right. Of course, one of those was suicide.
It was?
From what I understand.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Right. Someone did this intentionally, I think. Okay. But nonetheless, this happens on a more than regular basis than people would like to realize. You don't hear about it. But you have to be on your P's and Q's.
You do.
The ramp is in a very, very, very dangerous place. Very dangerous. And so your alertness goes. Police officers get stressed. You're working overtime. You're not getting the proper sleep. You don't eat properly. Next thing you know, you have somebody that's agitated. Instead of de-escalating, you're escalating. All of these things work together. And people are human. Just like folk go into the office and have a bad day. Police officers have a bad day. Firefighters have a bad day. Doctors have a bad day. Ministers have a bad day. People have bad days.
Yeah.
And so you can limit those by having a workplace that is conducive to work and engaging in a happy, a fulfilling environment. These things are intentional and they require good management. And a lot of times, a lot of places, you don't have that good management. And therefore, the workforce suffers, the company suffers, the product suffers, and then, ultimately the customer, or in our case, the constituent suffers.
Mm-hmm. Well, these are some horrific incidents, man. Suicide, violence in general. I mean, yesterday I'm listening to some mother, probably can't be no more than 30 years old of age, chastising her teenage son, about to hit the son, telling the son, don't put your arms up. I mean, you can see where problems are going to lead to. Now, you're a young teenager. You're growing up in this type of household day after day after day. I don't want to say abusiveness is, I got any proof of that, but you can see a lot of red flags just by that 10-minute me watching what I've seen for 10 to 15 minutes is telling me that this parent or this person is probably not the best fit parent.
Well, they might not be the best fit parent as you look in from the outside, but they could be an overstressed parent. See, in communities, when you see stuff like that happen, and what you could do is you could go over there and say, hey, what's happening, I was thinking of having a little block party and just trying to get some buy-in from neighbors on the street. We might do something Saturday. If we do, I'm just giving you a heads up. Love for you to join us. Yeah. Start to build relationships, and now you have someone to talk to. Maybe there's no one for them to talk to.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, and this person may also need some professional help beyond that too. That's part of it. What you just said is a starting point. But if that doesn't work, for whatever reason, then they need some other resources, some other alternatives.
Well,
if one step doesn't work,
we're not in a position to determine what that person needs other than from sideline viewers. But if you actually want to get involved, you could actually go and talk to them. There's ways that you can intercede. Neighbors can intercede.
Well, that too, but also there's like a lot of other reckless behavior that's going on this street. Not just this one person. I guess every community you're going to have some bad apples, some bad elements, and it's just going to be a way of functioning.
So then the question becomes, what do we do about it, Jonathan?
Yeah, I don't know what you really do, to be honest, because
we have to come up with some solutions, because what we're very good at as a society, and we're experts in Hartford.
Well, one solution
is coming up with what's wrong.
Yeah,
we identify wrong real well. Well, what are we going to do about? it?
Well, that's what I just said earlier. That guy going around shooting people, that's a criminal problem. You got to get this person off of the street. He's trying to shoot 30 different people in Baltimore. These are people you have to get off of the streets.
Well, that's a given.
Yeah, and I don't think we're doing that good a job. Evidently, if these type of people are roaming our streets with guns and looking to kill innocent people.
But Jonathan, in my never to be humble opinion, these kinds of discussions always happen after the event.
No, but I can see things leading up to that.
So then, if there's a red flag, where are the people who are responsible for the red flag identifying and then interceding? If someone's driving around looking to kill 30 people,
well, I don't know.
Those individuals should be stopped way in advance, but no one knows that that's actually what they're doing.
Right.
So the conversations always happen after the fact. So we have a society that is coming out of a pandemic where people's social order has been totally disrupted, where a lot of the safety nets that people had, churches, mosques, synagogues, are gone. They just disappeared off the face of the earth. Where you have community assets that go in and help keep the calm, they're gone.
Right.
You emerge from that, there should be somebody who has enough forward thinking to understand that when these things come, when you come out of these things, there's going to be issues associated with them. What are you doing to intercede? I would venture to say very little to nothing.
Well, I would say, I don't know again how the employment. There is a situation where if you're a productive citizen and there's jobs, I recommend it maybe here locally, put a job fair. I guess we do have job fairs time to time, so this is nothing new, having job fairs. but there's a high unemployment of people just roaming around doing nothing most of the day, which I think is going to lead to other problems.
That's not necessarily true. The people roaming around in West Hartford ain't leading to problems.
No, but I'm saying a lot of things like, beefing, fighting, arguments, and all of that. You can sense where problems are going to come from.
So if there's people arguing, that is a clear indicator that there may be an outbreak of violence. So we could intercede before it gets to a particular place.
Yeah.
We don't. Folks sit back and they watch. Then they complain when someone pops off, goes wild because they were offended by something.
So it's your business or it's your citizen right for everybody that's having a personal, because you got to be careful with domestic incidents. You better know what you're doing when you're going to intervene in a domestic.
I don't think it's your right. I think it's an obligation that we have as neighbors in a community. A community is self-policing, self-educating, and self-sustaining. If you can't police your community, then you don't have one.
Well,
if the neighbors don't care for one another enough to say, hey, can you come here a second? I need a little help with my phone. It doesn't mean you jump in and try and break up a fight. There are ways to get people to calm down, to move them away from what it is that they were doing. Intercede.
Yeah, if you call the police, they'll stop.
Well, I don't mean call the police.
You don't want to go that route.
Care enough to just have a conversation with someone, Jonathan.
Right.
There's so many different ways people can intercede if they had a community.
Yeah, I agree with that. I may not believe it's a real community. I may not believe what I'm saying. The job fair of putting people to work, being productive or doing something with your life usually kind of keeps you away from having amount of waste of time, but time on your hand that you're just looking to get into something to fill a void.
I would strongly debate that issue because it presupposes that the only reason people get into trouble is because they actually had too much time. So why don't we put them to work? Well, who's the we that makes that decision, and where are they gonna work? And who's to say that because somebody isn't working, they're like predisposed to doing wrong?
No, I'm not really saying that. It's no different than you saying your son, there's consequences. Now, you can't have it both ways. I understand it's your son, it's a little bit different, but in your house, your son is going to have a job, or there's going to be consequences.
That's different, Jonathan.
So society, if we're going to have people not working, you're not going to make any income.
Jonathan.
Those are the reality consequences.
This is a circular conversation we have ad nauseum. You cannot go out into the street and tell society you need to get a job or there's going to be a consequence. Who has the right to do that?
You don't have to tell them. They're going to realize when they have no income coming in that is going to be a consequences, which could lead to something else. So I don't have to tell nobody if you don't have a business or you don't have a product to sell. If you don't want to work a 9-to-5 job, then it's not going to be consequences. You're going to realize, unless you turn to crime, that week after week after week, right, you're not going to have no income. Just like what you're saying with your son, you're trying to prepare him early.
We're making a giant leap from people shooting up a crowd to folk not having a job. You're talking about things that should be common sense to most human beings.
Right.
People know that they need to eat. And they will find a job. You don't have to have a job fair for them because they have to realize it's their responsibility to go out and get a job.
The job fair can kind of be the placement assistant sometime. You have...
And so if you don't have a job fair, are you suggesting
that
they won't be able to find their way to get assistance?
No, I'm saying...
Because that's why you're making it sound.
The job fair can sometimes be awareness of jobs that you may not be aware of. Okay, somebody told me about a particular job I was not thinking about. I didn't need to go to no job fair, just a networking base of somebody letting me know about a particular job, and then you go apply for the job. So if there are job opportunities out there that people don't know about, they're not prepared for, I don't know if that's where the job fair falls into the solution piece. Okay, a person may have a lot of different companies that's looking for people. You can go on Indeed, other sources, and check, online for different companies that's out there.
Well, I think that's a whole nother subject.
Whole other subject, right? I know.
To me, we're talking about intervening where there's red flags.
Yeah.
And people on the edge where if there's no intercession there, that they're gonna go out and shoot people up.
But you didn't like my advice of calling the cops, though. I said
no. I didn't say that.
You didn't say that? Okay.
If you see someone engaged in some sort of criminal activity that requires law enforcement, then you should call the police.
Right.
I'm suggesting that we should be neighborly enough, community-oriented enough, that when we see or hear disturbances, that we care enough to intercede. We know them. Hey, Billy, what's up, man? I don't want to interrupt y'all. Can I ask you a real quick question? That's enough sometimes.
Right.
You don't wait until the person's over there beating the other person with a baseball bat, and I knew that was going to happen. This has been increasing for the last 6 weeks.
Well, this person was saying, like, this is my son telling somebody else, I don't want my son over here doing that. It seemed like, I'm just going by an observation. This person would try to contradict you or saying, don't be telling me how to raise my son. I'm not saying for sure that's how that person would have responded.
Right. I'm not talking about you going over there telling them, don't you be hitting on your son. I'm saying diffuse the situation,
right,
by having them come talk about something that seems totally off topic. And in doing so, you pull them away from that human activity of being angry and yelling and screaming at the son. Then, over the course of the week, you have some conversations. Sit down, have a coffee, a beer, whatever it is that people do. Sit on the steps, talk. And then you can begin to reason with people. And then say, yo, is everything all right at home? But these are where you ease into these conversations because you have a community and you're neighbors with one another.
You're right.
We have people who are neighbors who would listen to each other argue, but would never ring a doorbell and say, how are you doing? That's not a community.
Right.
It's not the government's responsibility to make sure you all do these things. It's the community's responsibility. Now, to the degree that we can, we need to rebuild these communities, give them back the tools necessary to be sustainable. That has to be intentional.
Right. Well, you make a good point about that part. You ease into something, not just tell this person, look, you raising your son the wrong way.
You ain't gonna get into trouble with that conversation. So that's a conversation you don't have. If you think that their son should be raised a certain way, then you model the behavior for them.
Or even calling law enforcement, because sometimes, that you could handle something a little bit easier than bringing the police involved.
Well, yeah. I mean, you call in law enforcement for something, you could be totally off base. You calling law enforcement because you think somebody's gonna get hurt.
Well, again, these are things I sometimes classify as airing our dirty laundry out. Unfortunately, we have dirty laundry that exists.
Everybody does.
Everybody does. That's true.
It's not like we. Who's we? Everyone has stuff they don't want other people knowing about or talking about.
Yes, but how we go about dealing with it, sometimes, bringing it out to the public is not always the best way. Like you say, maybe you handle
once
things
once it's public, now everybody weighs in on your issue or somebody else's issue. It's not their issue.
And again, I'm kind of wrong bringing your son like I do every now and then.
Well, you can bring my son. That doesn't matter to me. That's a different. When you are raising, you may not believe that he should have to work if he's going to be in the house. I
believe what you're saying, but I'm saying that could be part of the problem towards the community. Maybe other parents or other adults don't see it, because you were saying in the long run you're not going to kick him out, but you want to make sure that if he's not in a position to have an income,
if you are of working age, my daughters know this. They're 13 and 12.
Right.
Now, when they turn 20 years old, if they don't have a job, we're going to have a problem, because you need to be gainfully employed or thinking along that line for your own sake.
Right.
For your own sake. I'll be doing a detriment to the child if I let them believe. Then they'll wind up being 45.
But
time goes by very quickly.
But the only thing is, and I know you're running for mayor, and I know you had a good economic game plan with bringing Y3K Global Media, because
Jonathan, that was in 2007.
Right. Well, no, that was 2011.
2011. That was a long time ago.
But the fact is, that same concept, what you just stated about your children, has to be towards society. I'm not saying on you.
Right.
But I'm saying that has to be part of the solution. Like, good teachers, making sure kids are learning, motivated properly.
Well, Jonathan, these are things that in theory could be part of a broader concept. I work in the realm of what can I do? The world should be nicer and there should be no hunger.
Right.
And global warming should be stopped. These things should be. I don't have any control over it.
And you don't really personally probably believe job fairs are really that big.
I think job fairs are great, and the people who are looking for help put job fairs on.
Right.
But a job fair in and of itself does not necessarily mean the people are going to start getting employed.
Well, the late Larry Childs was one of the first persons that told me.
And we're running out of time,
Oh, we are? Okay.
Yeah. That's that music.
Right. I don't know. I'm not paying attention to the time. The problem, he said, in Hartford is not, this was probably about 20 years ago, the problem is not jobs. This problem is you're not getting the jobs. But really, he should stay, the problem may not be good jobs, that you have good companies that pay well. It's just people are having some time of difficulty getting the good jobs.
Well, we are initiating something. We released a press release this morning, the closing the literacy gap. First and foremost, people need to be real about what the situation is in Hartford. 61% of the adults in Hartford are functionally illiterate. They can't read an ATM machine.
Right.
So if you have a population that can't read, can't fill out an application, in what capacity are these people employable in a technologically growing society? So, you have all the job fairs you want. If people can't qualify to get the job, you still have a problem. So we need to rebuild our communities. We really need to rebuild the capacity and the human potential that we have in our citizens if we want them to truly be able to be in a place where they can function and be better contributors to the society and rebuild our communities. These are intentional things.
That's a great follow-up to your Wednesday show, this illiteracy campaign that you said you have in place.
Yeah.
That is an excellent solution. Because
well, it's the 6th point in our 6-point plan in terms of priorities, realigning Hartford's priorities to help get Hartford where it needs to be. It's more than a vibrant buildings downtown. It's actually the human beings that make up the community that live, whether they're downtown or Frog Hollow or North End or South End or Silent Hill or Blue Hills or Behind the Rocks, or leave somebody out and get in trouble. Any of the 17 communities that make up Hartford, they're people. A community is people. It's not buildings. It's not how much money can be extracted. It's people.
Well, again, your approach is not to look down on people or make people feel ashamed because they can't read or write. It's try to help them where they can
We
read.
want to help people learn how to read or write. So the challenge will be, I'm going to learn Spanish.
Oh, okay.
I become conversationally fluid in Spanish in 4 years because I'm functionally illiterate. I'm totally illiterate when it comes to Spanish.
Right.
All right. So I can't read or write Spanish in a city where Spanish speaking people are the majority. All right. So just like I'm saying people need to be able to better have command of English, I'm talking about English learners.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not talking about Spanish speaking people or any of the other 76 ethnic groups that live in this international city. I'm talking about English people, people coming out of high school and can't read or write or function. So if I'm going to ask people to take that challenge, want to remove the stigma, make it a challenge, then I'm going to put myself in the same boat. So I'm going to learn Spanish. If I can do that, then we expect that other people can do the things that they need to do. But we're going to roll this all out on the 11th of July. We're going to have a big press conference in front of City Hall.
That's next week, actually.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
Yeah.
All right.
But we're out of time, Jonathan.
All right. Great show. Great interview. Great ability. A great format that you put together, and I appreciate this.
All right. Jonathan Small every Monday in here with you all. Always have a special guest joining us. Special thanks to our music man, Jay Hogarth, and of course you all out there. And our guest today, Gordy. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all real soon. Bye-bye.